Donald Trump?
The beloved
That's
Donald
running
Trump.
for
President of the
resident?
United States of the America.
Oh, president?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was resident. So he's not only going to live there, he's going to run the show?
Never really wanted to talk about it very much, but when dozens of former members of the Trump administration are sounding alarms, saying, for God's sake, don't do this again, you have to pay attention. They're telling us something important. These aren't soft people. They're governors, generals.
Why isn't Harrison Ford eager to speak out? What's driving him to comment now? With dozens of Trump's former team, tough figures like governors and generals, warning against another term, how can you ignore them? Ford insists their alarm signals something critical. What's at stake when even Trump's inner circle says, don't do this again? Harrison Ford's endorsement of Kamala Harris for the 2024 presidential election underscores a pivotal argument rooted in the urgency of bipartisan alarm. Drawing attention to the warnings issued by former Trump administration officials, a coalition of governors, generals, and seasoned political figures, Ford emphasizes the gravity of their collective dissent. These individuals, he notes, are not politically timid. Their careers were built within the Republican Party, yet they now advocate against its current trajectory, marking a historic departure from partisan loyalty. Their plea to not do this again reflects a shared conviction that the stakes transcend traditional party lines, framing the election as a safeguard for democratic norms rather than a routine political contest. Ford leverages their credibility to highlight the existential risk of returning to a leadership style he characterizes as authoritarian, contrasting it with Harris's commitment to fostering debate and collaboration. By stressing that these former officials are preparing to vote across party lines for the first time, he positions their defiance as a moral imperative, one that aligns with his own decision to prioritize democratic integrity over ideological consistency. This narrative taps into broader anxieties about political polarization and the erosion of institutional trust, framing Harris as a figure capable of uniting disparate voices through respectful disagreement, a stark counterpoint to what he portrays as Trump's demand for unquestioning loyalty and retribution. Ford's appeal hinges on the idea that when lifelong conservatives break ranks to sound alarms, their message carries unparalleled weight, urging voters to view the election not through partisan lenses, but as a collective responsibility to preserve foundational principles of governance. His personal voting history, spanning 6 decades, adds gravitas to his endorsement, framing his choice as both pragmatic and principled a call to move forward by embracing leaders who prioritize dialogue over division. This argument resonates in a climate where political disillusionment runs high, positioning Harris as a stabilizing force against what Ford implies is a threat to the very mechanisms of democracy.
Standing up against the leader of the party they spent their lives advocating for. For many of them, this will be the first time they've ever voted for someone who doesn't have an R next to their name, because they know this really matters.
Harrison Ford's commentary on lifelong Republicans abandoning party loyalty to support Kamala Harris underscores a seismic shift in political allegiances, framed as a defense of democratic principles over partisan identity. By highlighting that these individuals, career politicians, governors, and military leaders, are preparing to vote against their party's nominee for the first time, Ford positions their decision as an extraordinary act of conscience. This rupture with decades of ideological alignment signals a recognition that the 2024 election transcends conventional political rivalry, instead representing a referendum on foundational democratic values. The willingness of these figures to publicly defy a leader they once supported reflects a profound disillusionment, suggesting that the current trajectory of their party has diverged irreparably from the institutional and ethical frameworks they once championed. Their crossover vote is not merely a tactical choice, but a symbolic rejection of what Ford implies is an authoritarian shift, one that prioritizes loyalty to a single figure over the pluralistic ideals of governance. This narrative taps into a broader discourse about the erosion of traditional party boundaries in the face of existential threats, framing Harris as a unifying figure capable of bridging divides through inclusive debate, while casting her opponent as a destabilizing force demanding ideological conformity. The gravity of their defection lies in its rarity. These are not casual voters, but individuals whose identities and careers were intertwined with republicanism, making their dissent a powerful indictment of the party's direction. Ford leverages this to argue that the election is not about policy disagreements, but about preserving a system where dissent is tolerated, compromise is possible, and power is exercised with accountability. By emphasizing that these Republicans are acting out of necessity rather than preference, he elevates their choice as a moral imperative, urging voters to similarly prioritize the survival of democratic norms over partisan loyalty. This message resonates in an era of heightened polarization, where trust in institutions is frayed, and elections are increasingly framed in apocalyptic terms. Ford's endorsement thus becomes a call to view the 2024 race through a lens of civic responsibility, where crossing party lines is not betrayal, but an act of patriotism, a safeguard against the entrenchment of authoritarianism. The subtext is clear. When even the most entrenched partisans acknowledge that the stakes demand unprecedented action, the electorate must heed their warning. Harris's candidacy, in this context, is portrayed not just as a political alternative, but as a bulwark for the democratic process itself, contrasting sharply with a vision of leadership rooted in retribution and absolutism. Ford's argument hinges on the idea that democracy's resilience depends on its defenders' willingness to adapt, even if that means abandoning lifelong affiliations, to confront threats that transcend traditional political categories. In framing the election as a historical inflection point, he transforms individual votes into collective acts of preservation, urging a departure from tribalism toward a renewed commitment to shared governance.
The other guy? He demands unquestioning loyalty, says he wants revenge.
Harrison Ford's critique of Kamala Harris's opponent hinges on contrasting leadership philosophies, collaborative governance versus authoritarianism. By framing the opposition as a figure who prioritizes absolute loyalty and personal vengeance, Ford underscores a threat to democratic norms where power is wielded not for collective progress, but to enforce conformity and settle scores. The demand for unquestioning loyalty evokes autocratic regimes where dissent is stifled, undermining the pluralism essential to healthy democracies. Similarly, the emphasis on revenge reframes politics as a personal battleground, prioritizing grievance over policy and eroding trust in institutions. This leadership style, Ford suggests, destabilizes accountability mechanisms, replacing debate with coercion and deepening societal divides. In contrast, Harris is portrayed as a leader who welcomes disagreement as a catalyst for progress, framing governance as a shared endeavor rather than a zero-sum contest. Ford's argument elevates the election beyond partisan rivalry, positioning it as a referendum on whether democratic institutions can withstand leaders who conflate power with personal allegiance. The urgency lies in preventing a cycle where loyalty to an individual supersedes constitutional principles, risking systemic decay. By highlighting revenge as a motivator, Ford critiques the normalization of divisive rhetoric that fuels polarization, urging voters to reject leaders who thrive on conflict. His endorsement frames the choice as one between preserving democratic resilience or enabling authoritarian entrenchment, a decision demanding courage to prioritize institutional integrity over tribal loyalty. In an era of political disillusionment, Ford's message resonates as a call to safeguard governance rooted in humility, dialogue, and service, framing Harris's candidacy as a bulwark against democratic backsliding. Ultimately, the critique underscores a pivotal choice: leaders who weaponize power versus those who steward it, with profound implications for democracy's future.
And Donald Trump, the Donald Trump that owned that building is not the same Donald Trump that I'm seeing now. You know, it's extraordinary because to me, he's dealing in divisiveness, in this business of turning people against each other.
Harrison Ford's reflection on Donald Trump's transformation prompted by Trump's own praise of Ford for renting his properties and standing up for America, reveals a profound shift in perception from a pragmatic landlord-tenant dynamic to a troubling critique of Trump's political persona. Spoken with the gravitas of a Hollywood icon known for stoic heroism, Ford's commentary likely emerges from a mix of personal experience, disillusionment, and a broader concern for national unity, set against the backdrop of Trump's divisive presidency. Several intertwined reasons fuel this observation, highlighting Ford's evolving view of a man he once knew in a simpler context. First, Ford's distinction between the Trump who owned the building he rented and the Trump of today rests on a tangible shift in their relationship's context. As an actor who valued convenience over luxury, I didn't think it was great architecture. Ford likely saw Trump initially as a functional figure in his life, a New York real estate mogul whose properties met a practical need. Trump's boast about their connection suggests a transactional bond Ford didn't reciprocate with affection, evidenced by his lukewarm assessment of the apartment. The Trump he now observes, however, transcends that mundane role, morphing into a political force whose actions Ford finds jarring. This evolution from a neutral landlord to a national figure wielding influence in unexpected ways likely startled Ford, prompting his note of extraordinary change. Second, the accusation of divisiveness points to Ford's dismay at Trump's political tactics, a stark contrast to their earlier, apolitical interaction. By the time of this statement, likely during or after Trump's 2016 to 2020 tenure, Ford had witnessed policies and rhetoric like the border wall push or shithole countries remark that polarized the nation. Known for a reserved public persona, Ford's choice to call out this business of turning people against each other suggests a visceral reaction to Trump's strategy of stoking cultural and racial tensions, perhaps clashing with Ford's own values of fairness and understated patriotism, seen in roles like Indiana Jones or Han Solo. This shift from a benign property owner to a divisive leader marks a betrayal of the neutrality Ford once assumed. Third, the cultural and political climate of Trump's era amplifies Ford's critique. Trump's claim that Ford stood up for America might echo MAGA rhetoric, but Ford reframes it through a lens of unity over factionalism. His career, spanning decades of American cinema, aligns him with a collective national identity, flawed yet aspirational, that Trump's presidency seemed to fracture. The rise of partisan labels like Freedom Coalition Republican or Socialist Democrat, which Ford rejects, reflects a polarization he attributes to Trump's influence. This business of division to Ford isn't just politics, it's a deliberate enterprise undermining the shared American ethos he values, making Trump's transformation both striking and personal. Fourth, Ford's call for a practical consciousness of what the country needs over ideology reveals a pragmatic streak clashing with Trump's approach. Unlike Trump's bombastic, ideologically charged style, evident in tax cuts for the wealthy or climate denial, Ford advocates for a grounded focus on collective well-being, domestically and globally. His disinterest in the apartment's grandeur mirrors this no-nonsense outlook, suggesting he once saw Trump as similarly pragmatic, a deal-maker, not a demagogue. The extraordinary leap to a figure thriving on conflict likely unsettled Ford, who prefers substance over spectacle, a preference honed by a career avoiding Hollywood excess. Finally, an understated emotional weight drives Ford's words. His typically laconic style, here stretched to critique, hints at genuine concern, not just casual observation. Trump's personal nod to their past, claiming affection beyond rent, might have irked Ford, who saw no deeper bond. The shift to a Trump fostering enmity over unity likely felt like a personal affront to Ford's sense of American identity, forged through roles embodying resilience and moral clarity. This isn't mere celebrity sniping. It's a measured lament from someone who knew Trump before the political mask, now seeing a stranger in his place. In essence, Ford's statement arises from Trump's shift from a practical landlord to a divisive leader, his polarizing tactics, the era's fractured politics, Ford's pragmatic ideals, and a quiet emotional recoil. It's a sober reflection from a man of few words, stunned by how a once familiar figure now threatens the unity he holds dear.
Get off my plane.
It's a movie.
And he liked
Donald.
the way
It was a movie. It's not like this in real life. But how would you know?
Harrison Ford's incisive comment, delivered during a conversation with journalist Angela Bishop, cuts to the heart of Donald Trump's apparent conflation of cinematic bravado with the intricate, often unglamorous realities of political leadership, offering a sharp lens through which to view the former president's approach to governance. When Trump praised Ford's role in Air Force One, specifically lauding the iconic moment where Ford's fictional president James Marshall growls, "Get off my plane," to a hijacker, Ford seized the opportunity to dismantle the notion that such theatrical heroics translate to real-world statesmanship. His response, laced with dry skepticism and a rhetorical "how would you know?" aimed at Trump, isn't merely a personal jab. It's a deliberate unraveling of the dangerous mythos Trump built around himself. One where the decisive, lone wolf resolve of a movie hero is mistaken for the collaborative endurance required to lead a nation. Ford, a veteran actor whose career spans decades of portraying rugged, principled figures like Indiana Jones and Han Solo, leverages his own authority as a purveyor of fictional leadership to underscore a critical divide. The scripted simplicity of Hollywood, where conflicts resolve in 2 hours with a punch or a catchphrase, bears little resemblance to the protracted, negotiation-heavy terrain of governing a pluralistic democracy. This critique strikes at Trump's tendency to frame complex policy challenges, immigration, trade wars, or global pandemics, as binary showdowns with clear enemies, a tactic that mirrors action movie tropes but flattens the multidimensional nature of systemic issues into digestible, populist soundbites. Ford's remark also exposes Trump's pre-political inexperience as a liability, a point sharpened by the subtle sting of "how would you know?" Before 2016, Trump had never held public office, his resume built instead on real estate deals, reality TV stardom, The Apprentice and a cultivated image of unshakable confidence. Ford's question implies that Trump's understanding of leadership may have been shaped less by the grind of legislative compromise or diplomatic finesse, and more by the aspirational narratives of entertainment narratives Ford himself has helped craft but recognizes as fantasy. This skepticism aligns with broader cultural anxieties about the rise of celebrity politicians who ride waves of media exposure and personal charisma into power, often bypassing the traditional proving grounds of public service. Trump's admiration for Ford's Air Force One persona, where a president single-handedly thwarts a crisis, mirrors his own campaign rhetoric, promising to drain the swamp or build the wall with the same unilateral swagger. Ford's retort serves as a quiet rebuke, suggesting that such performative bravado, while effective for rallying crowds or boosting ratings, falters when confronted with the slow, deliberative machinery of democratic governance, where success hinges on coalition building, expertise, and patience, skills not honed on a soundstage. The exchange further illuminates Trump's penchant for blurring the lines between his public persona and presidential authority, a habit Ford subtly mocks by emphasizing the fictional nature of his own role. Trump's tenure was marked by a flair for the dramatic. Think of his tweeted policy pronouncements, his staged photo ops, like the Bible-holding moment outside St. John's Church amid 2020 protests, or his penchant for casting opponents as cartoonish villains, Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe. This approach echoes the zero-sum dynamics of action films, where dominance is the ultimate prize and compromise signals weakness. Ford's critique hints at the cost of this mindset. By treating politics as a stage for personal triumph rather than collective stewardship, Trump eroded the institutional trust that underpins democracy. His leadership often prioritized spectacle-raucous rallies, bombastic claims of fixing America over the quiet, unglamorous work of policy implementation. A contrast Ford, with his understated gravitas, implicitly condemns. The Air Force One reference becomes a metaphor for this disconnect. Trump saw President kicking ass as a model, while Ford sees it as a fiction unfit for the real-world stakes of guiding a nation through crises like economic inequality or climate change. This tension between entertainment and governance resonates deeply in an era where political discourse increasingly mirrors the rhythms of mass media. Trump's rise coin. Harrison Ford's unflinching take on Donald Trump, a blend of weathered gravitas, sharp insight, and a fierce stand for democratic integrity, leaves us with a lingering question. What resonates with you most after this collision of Hollywood icon and political titan? Was it Ford's stunned reflection on Trump's shift from landlord to divisive demagogue, a personal thread unraveling a national fracture? His dry dismantling of Air Force One bravado, exposing the gap between cinematic swagger and real-world leadership? Or the urgent weight of lifelong Republicans breaking ranks, a bipartisan alarm bell Ford rings with sober clarity? We want to hear from you. Did Ford's measured disillusionment stir your own unease about democracy's drift, or did his spotlight on Harris as a unifying force cut through the chaos for you? Perhaps you've seen other figures blur the lines between spectacle and governance in your own time. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're eager to unpack this with you. And don't forget to like this post, follow for more, and turn on notifications so you never miss our dives into the stories shaping our future. Your engagement fuels this effort to probe truth, challenge power, and elevate voices like Ford's. Thanks for reading, and we'll see you in the next one.